honourable member for South Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This past December, the Liberal government revived Bill C-5, an act to amend the Criminal Code and the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. The government has claimed that the purpose of this act is to root out systemic racism in the criminal justice system and address the root causes of substance abuse in light of the worsening opioid crisis. Conservatives have another view. We have outlined the dangers in the government's Bill C-5 with regard to violent criminals, lessening sentences for gun crimes and the removal of mandatory minimum penalties, among other concerns. The Liberals are eliminating mandatory prison time for criminals who commit robbery with a firearm, weapons trafficking, and drive-by shootings. They're doing this because they feel these laws are unfair. They are more interested in standing up for criminals than defending our communities. Tell this to the families of victims in my own riding of South Surrey White Rock. As a member of Parliament from British Columbia and as a mother, I know illegal drugs are a scourge in our society. This enactment amends the Criminal Code and the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act to repeal too many mandatory minimum penalties, allowing for a greater use of conditional sentences, and establish diversion measures for simple and first-time drug offences that are already in place. BC already has drug courts. Mandatory minimum sentences are not used for simple possession now. They don't exist. Despite what the Liberal government has said on C-5, the Supreme Court did not declare all mandatory minimums unconstitutional. The courts have struck down some, but these punishments have been on the books for decades. In fact, a majority of the mandatory minimums were introduced under previous Liberal governments. For example, the mandatory minimum penalty repealed for using firearms in commission of an offence dates back to the Liberal government of 1976. While the government claims to be undoing the work of the former Conservative government, it would truly be undoing the work of many former Liberal governments as well. This Liberal government is maintaining many of the mandatory minimums were introduced or strengthened by the former Conservative one. In C-5, the government is eliminating 6 mandatory minimums under Controlled Drugs and Substances Act that target drug dealers: trafficking or possession for the purpose of trafficking, importing and exporting or possession for the purpose of exporting, production of a substance Schedule 1 or 2 like heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, crystal meth. The government is claiming this is solely to help those who struggle with addictions, but instead, the government is removing the mandatory minimums for those criminals who prey on those with addictions. Imagine what a parent goes through when their child is addicted to fentanyl. And it is so addictive that it is only a matter of time before they overdose. With carfentanil, young people take it once, their first hit is their last, and their heart stops before they hit the floor. The bill allows for greater use of conditional sentence orders, such as house arrest, for a number of offences where the offender faces a term of less than 2 years imprisonment. The offences now eligible include trafficking in or exporting, importing Schedule 3 drugs. That includes mescaline, LSD, and others. What exactly is being done right now by this government to crack down on the drug trade? Why is the government not tackling the massive issue of supply in Canada? According to Criminal Intelligence Service Canada, who has strategically allocated resources to investigate organized crime groups with a higher threat level, there are over 1,800 OCGs in Canada. Larger OCGs do not generally restrict themselves to one illicit substance and are importing an army of illicit substances. 75% of OCGs analyzed by Criminal Intelligence Service Canada, CSIS, are involved in cocaine trafficking, and the legalization of cannabis has done little to disrupt or displace OCGs due to the fact that 97% of them are involved with importing cannabis, are also involved in multi-commodity trafficking. It was noted that organized crime in Canada has grown due to an increase in criminal entrepreneurs that have harnessed the anonymity of the internet to perpetrate crime. In addition, the dark web has given rise to an increasing number of criminals who are operating independently to implicate themselves in the fentanyl market and rapidly growing meth market due to the relative ease of obtaining precursor chemicals used in their production and synthesis. In addition to OCGs, there have been increasing threats observed from outlaw motorcycle gangs. For instance, the Hells Angels is an outlaw motorcycle gang with global ties to other active OCGs in Canada. The organization has expanded across the country, and 50% of organized crime can be attributed to their operations. The Hells Angels has increased their number of support clubs from 40 to 120. This expansion has resulted in approximately double the amount of criminal activity. The Hells Angels use their coordination to ship fentanyl and methamphetamine together, contributing to the trend of polydrug trafficking. Their operations vary in terms of sophistication, but pose a threat to public safety nonetheless. Violence surrounding OCGs is increasing and is commensurate with the increase in firearms-related crime in Canada. The expansion of illicit handguns westward from Ontario and the escalating use of social media to facilitate the illicit drug trade. It was noted that many key players from the largest OCGs have been killed in the past 18 months, both domestically and while brokering drug deals abroad. With respect to importation of illicit substances in Canada, existing OCGs with networks and smuggling routes for cocaine and heroin from Mexico are shifting focus. There's been a large increase in fentanyl and methamphetamine smuggling from Mexico. Favoring profitability, OCGs are moving away from heroin and toward fentanyl. As meth becomes less expensive to produce, its street value is declining, leading demand for meth to increase as people who use drugs shift away from more expensive drugs to meth. Notably, Canada has been identified as a global transshipment country for fentanyl. Currently, there is a 5-to-1 import-export ratio with 300 different OCGs involved in importation. The government has this woke view of criminal justice where if you keep people out of prison, they will reform and all will be okay. But I think drug dealers need to be in prison, not on house arrest, where they can continue to ruin children's lives, families' lives, and devastate communities. These most vulnerable in our society must be protected. I believe that is not in question. In my home province, according to preliminary data released by the BC Coroner's Service, the toxic illicit drug supply claimed the lives of at least 2,224 British Columbians in 2021. Lisa Lapointe, the chief coroner, stated, "Over the past 7 years, our province has experienced a devastating loss of life due to a toxic illicit drug supply. This public health emergency has impacted families and communities across the province and shows no signs of abating. In 2021 alone, more than 2,200 families experienced the devastating loss of a loved one. In the past 7 years, the rate of death due to illicit drug toxicity in our province has risen more than 400%. Drug toxicity is now second only to cancers in BC for potential years of lives lost. Fentanyl was detected in 83% of samples tested in 2021. Carfentanil was present in 187 results, almost triple the number recorded in 2020. Illicit drug poisoning is now the leading cause of death amongst BC people aged 19 to 39, people in the prime of their lives. For men, the toxic drug crisis has been so severe that overall life expectancy at birth for males has declined in recent years in BC. The townships that experienced the highest number of illicit drug toxicity deaths in 2021 were Vancouver, Surrey, and Victoria. Representing and living in South Surrey White Rock, these aren't just statistics. We live it every day in BC. I feel for those families that have lost loved ones to drugs. For that reason, I cannot support this government bill. Characterize me as what you will, but 6 lives will be lost in British Columbia to drug overdose today. And I don't think C5 does a thing to deter drug dealers from killing my constituents. It makes their lives easier while they destroy those around them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Montcalm.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. I'm having a hard time following my colleague's logic. C5 isn't in place yet, and she says that people are going to be dying. But, you know, right now, we're already following the approach that has been enforced for a long time and that has not led to any good results. One of the positive results of harm reduction is that it allows the police to better concentrate their resources, and the courts as well, to be able to fight real drug smugglers and criminal organizations. The Honourable Member.
Well, Madam Speaker, I've been accused of many things, but usually it isn't that I'm illogical. I think my arguments are extremely logical, in fact. We know that in this country, we have very poor supervision of our ports. We are not able, we don't have the resources have not been allocated by this government, either in personnel or investment in money, to properly monitor the drugs that come into this country through the ports and through the mail. This is a global phenomenon, and they are very easily obtained. What we are talking about is looking to those that traffic in the misery and dependency of others. And that's what we should be focused on, victims, not helping those who want to traffic in drugs.
Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, my honourable colleague quoted Lisa Lapointe, a very respected public health official in British Columbia. She has called for the decriminalization of drugs and to treat drug use and substance use disorder as health issues. My honourable colleague, I think, properly empathizes with the unbelievable astronomical death rate in British Columbia. The New Democrats have pointed to the problem being the toxic street supply and the fact that after decades and decades and decades of a tough-on-crime, war-on-drugs approach, which attempts to punish and interdict drugs, is an absolute, abject, empirical, total failure. I'm wondering, she claims to be logical. Can she tell me if she thinks the war on drugs has been successful, and if she thinks that more punishment and trying to interdict drugs will make any different result than has been over the last 50 years?
Member for South Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I have a lot of respect for my colleague who's been in this House a long time, even though we often approach things from a very different point of view. But the fact of the matter is that just because a fight is hard, or just because a fight isn't immediate in its results, doesn't mean you give up the fight. And to say that we don't like the results of where things are right now, and then just say, so let's just abandon that. He mentions Lisa Lapointe, the chief coroner. What she's focusing on are addicts and people who need help with drug addiction, and that is my focus as well. We need greater and larger expansion of help with drug treatment centers, with places for families to help their addicted loved one have a place to go, have a place to get off those drugs, be able to embrace a different life. And that has nothing to do with going soft on those who traffic in human misery.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Well, I want to reassure my colleague. I didn't say she was illogical. I said I was having a hard time following her logic, which is quite different. Now, the Bloc Québécois gets up every day in this House to tell the government that C5 isn't good enough and that we need to do better fighting against criminal organizations. We need to have a formal list of criminal organizations. So what my colleague was saying about borders, there are a lot of loopholes, and I imagine that she would agree with our bill on that and would vote for it.
Well, this is where there is an alignment with what I hear from the Bloc and my own personal feelings on this. They talk about gang violence, they talk about crimes, particularly I hear in Montreal from their interventions in the House. We have these same issues in Surrey, where I am from, Surrey, BC. We have a rampant gang violence problem in that community, and it pours over to innocents, such as a local man who is a coach and a nurse at our local hospital, and through mistaken identity and the car he drove, he was shot down in his driveway, leaving his family bereft and bereaving, and he had nothing to do with it. So these are very serious issues, and we are in alignment on that. Thank you.
Reprise du débat.